of ORCA. I'll explain it in a second. Let me just share the link. Okay, I have liftoff. Anyway, thank you for joining me. Let me share it one more time. See if I can get a certain look. Anyway, thank you all for joining me. For the new people, I'll give you three things. Then we'll go. First, my given name is Chimoge. And again, these are things to help you understand me. It's part of the greeting. I've registered viewers. There's 2 right now. That's the number of Kala Kana. Thank you very much. The second thing is my astrological moon sign is Pisces. And the third thing is I currently live in Atlanta, Georgia. And then I have 10 registered viewers. 10 is the number of Amadioa. Here we go. So let me explain this segment. ORCA is another name for the thing Orie, but the complicated thing about the thing Orie. When I say thing, I'm speaking about the 49 things that undergird existence. Orie is one of those. The complicated thing is that most of Orie exists outside of this world, and it's very basic. It's one of the Opuru Ihe, under things, basic things. But when Orie manages to come to the world, that is actually Amadioha. So the animal we call orca, and again, orca is another name for Orie. When you see it in this world, you should actually just call it Kalakana. If you choose to call it orca, you're kind of reducing it to something else. It's interesting. So this is just an example of how things can mix. I learned this really yesterday, and I'll leave it at that for now. So, what's the point of orca? One of the numbers of Orie, or orca, is 3. So the point is I can give out some information without saying everything because I don't feel ready to say everything yet. So I'm going to be intentionally vague. See what you understand. Shout out to all the Abarinkeke. All right, first, Paul Pierce. Paul Pierce used the term to refer to Megan the Stallion in relation to Clay Thompson. Because again, I'm talking about that whole issue, but honing in on stuff Paul Pierce said on his podcast recently. He used the term to refer to her in relation to Clay Thompson. The term involved the word work. And he really implied that Clay Thompson was justified in what he supposedly did because he needed to do that to get through a period of work. What kind of work requires that kind of work? That's thing one. Let me leave that there. Hmm. It's thing two. You see, Aurier the thing, when it manifests everywhere, is primarily everything but a person. The biggest manifestation of Aurier is a being. And the being, you can just call it the Ibu. And you can also call him Kalakano, because that's also a Madioha. Inside he's Aurier, but outside when you see him, until you realize what's in there, that's Kalakano. What am I saying here? We shouldn't always assume that life forms we interact with are people. Sometimes they're less than that, and oftentimes they're greater. We should take that into account. That's the second thing. Third thing, our planet has a very long history. There are many different aspects of our history that are currently unknown to us. We have a limited amount of time. Why do we have a tendency to hone in on history that is unpleasant? Is it always necessary to go into all those details? I'm not saying that we should avoid unpleasant things to a fault, but why is history always about Achu and Kenjaw? Those are the three things. Now let's Muku, and this is what I'll really talk about. Because again, I'm still experimenting with this segment. Let's look at Paul Pierce as a person. Because I'm, again, because Oria mixes things up, but I'm a Madioha, so at some point I gotta get real. Side note, Oria is the second biggest rival of a Madioha, but rival's not enemy. You know, it's someone who gets into you for a purpose. And I'll leave it at that. Anyway, um, you see, his comments have been disturbing me. I've talked about them of late, but as I've thought about it more, I get more disturbed. Um, let's look at him as a person. This is a man who is in his 40s. So, um, he's not someone who was born yesterday. At the same time, um, and again, you guys know my thoughts on lifespan, but even by most people's standards, um, he's not at the most senior age possible. So there's more growth to do. Um, so you would expect a healthy person of his age to be above um, what I'll call public relationship squabbling. Okay, and there's a difference between squabbling and one answering a claim made about you. Because say someone said, "Hey, um, we were dating." I'm just using this common example, and then I don't think you were emotionally available, so we broke up. You could answer that and say, "I disagree," and you can be polite. And I'm just using that as a common example, okay? Where people have a disagreement about what was happening in a relationship. Um, and I'll leave it at that. Obviously, everyone might have their thoughts on the spread of who's right or wrong when things like that happen. But anyway, you have the right to do that. So, okay, that's not petty squabbling. And then if you have um, advanced thoughts, well thought out thoughts, that you share with a purpose about relationships in general, either conceptually or um, in terms of what is going on in the world today, that's not squabbling. But a lot of his comments now are squabbling. And I'll leave it at that for now, but I'll come back to that. So let's look at his life. He um again, maybe some people know better than me. Obviously I'm familiar with him, but I don't know every detail about his life before he was in the NBA. But obviously to get to the NBA, you have to have been relatively famous among people you started with, say kids you grew up with, people your high school, things like that. So obviously he was a talented high school player. And then I don't remember if he went to college or came straight out of college, but he would have been drafted into the NBA by the time he was in his early 20s. So by the time he's in his early 20s, this is a man with a lot of fame and power and acclaim and accomplishment. So, you would expect someone like that to either obtain a very comfortable life or to face what I'll call legitimate challenges that put him at the nexus of society, okay? Because rich and famous people often have a lot of challenges, but if they're healthy, those challenges are due to overall societal problems, okay? And I'll leave it at that. So a healthy person in that position should either not, well, okay, I'll say it like this. They should either not be constantly talking about their discontent with things publicly, or when they are, they're trying to advance people forward and they're talking as much as possible in a progressive way. Third option, they have some sort of handicap, maybe health or whatever, time, something, and they can't express themselves well, but it gets telegraphed to the public. Paul Pierce hasn't really done that. Again, he had a long storied career in the NBA. He retired, I don't know if it was up to 10 years ago. I'll have to look it up. Could I even look it up now? Let me look it up. Let's share this again. Okay. Let me just say that in case you didn't hear. Paul Pierce um, entered the NBA in 1998 after 3 years playing college basketball in Kansas at the University of Kansas. And then he retired in 2017. So he's been retired for about 9 years now. But he's one of the most famous players in history. So, and obviously earned a lot of money over the course of his career. What am I getting at here? Someone like that should be very comfortable in the relationships department, or if they're having challenges, they should be speaking progressively, and really they should see that they're a manifestation of overall societal problems, unless they're not on their square. And if they're not on their square, they should have the ability to see that. Let's look at the podcast. Paul Pierce and his co-host, to my understanding, are in a relationship. So, you know, it looks like he's in a relationship that's at least producing some sort of work. But the stuff he says on the podcast is not progressive relationship wise. So, and I'm not going to assume monogamy with them. And I'm not going to assume I know his standards for relationships. But all I'm going to say is the way he talks, it seems to indicate a high degree of relationship discontent. So the question is it discontent with his personal relationships? Is it discontent with the relationship landscape he sees for other people and what's going on with other people, or is it a mix of both? No matter what the answer is to that, I think his views on relationships are really not on square, because if he's unhappy with his own personal relationships or whatever, constantly advancing male supremacist talking points, which he seems to do. Again, I haven't seen most of his podcast episodes, but every time I've watched one or seen a clip, he's been advancing something like that. So advancing those kind of talking points is not helpful for him personally. And I would go further than that. I would say, unless he's developed some sort of unethical relationship system, it's unnecessary. And I'm going to preface my comments with this: the way people value things like status and fame and the like in terms of relationships is not really on square in society today. But if that's the standard people are judging him by, at least superficially, he shouldn't have a problem with his relationships. Definitely not more than the average person. So to go into that kind of stuff, it doesn't make sense. Then it gets more concerning if you're looking at the overall relationship um, landscape, excuse me, in the world today. Let's zoom out a bit. There's all sorts of crime and other discord in the world today. So, given that, looking primarily at, you know, I guess, um, and then this is where I'm really thinking of how to explain it. Looking primarily at, um, you know, and it's hard to know what to call it. I'll just say private behaviors of, let's say, women, because that seems to be who he tends to criticize. Private behaviors of one group of people you don't like as the cause doesn't make sense. That's systemic. And then if you just look at some of the implications of his critiques, it would make relationships worse. Now let's go back to what I was talking about with um, his comments about Clay Thompson. I'll debut the phrase he used, but I don't want to say it too much because I think a lot of the lingo people use in certain what I'll call subcultures, and subcultures can be big. A lot of the lingo that people use in certain subcultures related to relationships is very harmful. So he said that, and again, if you don't want to hear something weird, maybe you can like just pay attention to something else right now. But he said that he thought that Megan the Stallion was quote unquote some work for Clay Thompson during the season. Mm. You see, a lot of people have focused on how it doesn't make sense for Clay Thompson to put Megan the Stallion in that category if he did because of certain actions he took. For example, introducing Megan the Stallion to his family and going to public events with her. I don't really want to go there. I'm not necessarily saying that, it's not understandable why people are saying that. I just want to go a step deeper and say that that category should not exist. There's no ethical way to make someone else just, and then again, it's really hard to use honest terms to explain that concept because the idea is that you're having intimate physical romantic interactions with someone, but you don't care about their well-being and do not want to showcase the relationship, and you also don't want the relationship to last forever or something like that. Yeah, so 1247. That's another number for Madio. I'm seeing it a lot. Yes. For the past few years, I've been seeing 1247 a lot. God, expand forever. Anyway, overall point here is sometimes I just want to throw things out there. That's kind of the point of this segment I'm seeing. Yeah, so just explore everything I'm saying. What is the point of that category? Why not just, you know, have relationships that you want to last forever? Not that you can control everything, but if you see that a relationship won't last forever or you don't want it to for whatever reason, why even begin it? And then if you're looking at someone that much, why is there no chance the relationship would work? And then yeah. Anyway, I think that's all for now. Thank you very much. I'll be on in Courier soon. See you guys. Kalakan.